The ceiling fan creaked as it spun in the dark room. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring into the black void above, counting each slow rotation like counting the countless lonely nights I had spent lying next to my husband. He was fast asleep, turned away from me, his breathing steady, like a silent refusal. I gently reached out and touched his back. The thin cotton shirt felt cold. He didn't stir. Like hundreds of nights before, I stayed still, buried my face into the pillow, and tried to stifle the sighs threatening to escape. Outside the window, the wind rustled through the bare branches, sounding like someone whispering my name. It must have been close to 2 a.m. A vague sadness crept in like the tide slowly swallowing the shore, making me want to cry without knowing exactly why. The chill didn't come from the weather. It came from the growing distance between us, a kind of cold you can't see, but one that freezes everything it touches. And it was that night, in that stillness, that I realized I was dangerously close to doing something wrong. Closer than I'd ever been. My name is Claire. I'm 36 years old and live in a quiet town about an hour outside Philadelphia. I work as a project manager at a tech company. My husband, Mark, is a civil engineer, the man I was head over heels for during my youth. We've been married for 12 years. 12 years, it sounds short when you say it out loud, but day after day, month after month, the love and passion we once had have been worn down by the weight of work, responsibility, and unspoken worries. By the end of each day, we were both exhausted. Dinner was usually takeout boxes. The noise from the TV filled the silence between us. And our bedroom, once a place of passionate embraces and hushed midnight whispers, had become nothing more than a space where two strangers lay side by side. I can't remember the last time we were truly intimate. Maybe 6 months ago. Maybe more. Mark isn't a bad man. He's never cheated. He's never yelled at me or been cruel. He's just empty, like a dry well after a long summer drought. And I, rather than voicing my loneliness, rather than seeking help, chose silence. I buried it all in nights like this, lying awake and pretending I was fine. I kept telling myself, just hold on a little longer. Things will get better. But even the heart has its limits. The lack of physical affection, something I never thought would matter this much, began to eat away at me, day after day, night after night. At first, it was just vague dreams. I dreamed of someone holding me close, pulling me into a warm chest. Gentle touches along my arm. A gaze so intense it felt like a hot blade slicing right through me. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, my face flushed in the dark. Then came the moments in the office, realizing my eyes would linger on the men around me. Something I'd never done before. It wasn't that they were more attractive than Mark. It was just, they saw me, a casual brush of the hand during a meeting, a small question about how my day was going, a kind smile. Tiny things, but to someone starved for connection, they felt enormous. I started wearing dresses more often instead of jeans. I dabbed on lipstick before heading to work, something I hadn't done in years. No one pushed me to do it. No one seduced me. I opened that door. Slowly, quietly. Almost without realizing it, I began to look forward to those fleeting glances and gentle words far more than I did the long, cold evenings beside a husband lost in work and television. I tried, really tried, not to cross the line. Until I met him. The first man who reminded me that I was still a woman. My boss. Work was the only place I could forget, even briefly, the emptiness of my marriage. Every morning, I walked into the office with a latte in hand, diving headfirst into a sea of tasks to fill the void inside me. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the loneliness clung to me like a long shadow. No one knew I was quietly falling apart. Some days, I'd send Mark a message, something simple like, "Do you miss me?" And he'd reply with a dry, "Busy. Let's talk tonight." Those moments, I'd just stare at the screen, feeling my heart sink into a dark, endless pit. I didn't ask for expensive gifts. I didn't want lavish vacations. All I wanted was a hug. A simple question, "Are you okay?" but all I got was silence. Or worse, forgetfulness. We still lived together, ate dinner together, occasionally made small talk. But the most vital part of any marriage, emotional and physical connection, had quietly died. Neither of us had the courage to mourn it. Some nights, I'd look at Mark, the man I once couldn't take my eyes off of, and feel a pain so sharp it stunned me. He felt like a stranger, like a guest who'd accidentally stayed too long in my life, with no intention of leaving. And in that cold, empty space, he appeared. At the right moment, in the right place. Like the first warm breeze after a long, bitter winter. His name was Daniel Whitmore. 43 years old, recently relocated from the New York office to take on the role of Chief Operating Officer at our Philadelphia branch 6 months ago. From the very first meeting, Daniel didn't feel like anyone I had ever known. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, his voice deep and warm, but never distant. His gray-blue eyes, quiet, steady, felt like a still lake at dawn. When he looked at someone, it was as if the world paused in that one silent moment. What I remember most from that first meeting wasn't his presentation. It was the way he looked at me when I spoke, attentive, present, as if every word I said mattered. In a place where I'd grown used to being just another cog in the system, being truly seen, truly heard, nearly brought tears to my eyes. At first, it was just casual conversation between us after meetings. A passing question. "Claire, got any plans this weekend?" A quiet compliment. I was really impressed with how you handled that last project. There was nothing over the top about it, nothing that felt like he was trying to win me over. It was simple, natural, and because of that, it stirred something in me far more deeply than any clumsy attempt at flirtation ever could. We began seeing more of each other during team meetings, project updates, and cross-department collaborations. Daniel was always respectful, always professional, always keeping a careful distance. He never once crossed the line. But something unnamed began to grow between us. A quiet tremor beneath the surface, like a thin current running under frozen ground. I found myself smiling more often just because of a simple message from him. "Don't stay too late. Take care of yourself, too." Or a cappuccino waiting on my desk with a sticky note that read, "For a slightly less gray Tuesday." Mark was still the same, distant, distracted, buried in work. Daniel, on the other hand, was present, warm, thoughtful, gentle. I tried to ignore the way my heart fluttered when Daniel walked past. Tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Tried to believe it was nothing more than a passing illusion, something a lonely woman conjured out of thin air. But deep down, I knew. The space between Daniel and me had grown so fragile that one touch could break it open. It happened late one evening, after most of the office had emptied out. I stayed behind to finalize a presentation for the next morning. The hallway was quiet, just the occasional clatter of the photocopier and the soft yellow glow of the overhead lights. Daniel walked past my door and stopped. "Still here?" he asked, his voice light as a breeze. I smiled, slightly flustered. "Just a little longer. I want to get this done so tomorrow's not so chaotic." He stepped in, holding 2 cans of soda, and offered me a Diet Coke. "You keep this up, you're going to make the rest of us look bad," he joked, eyes sparkling. I laughed, took the can from him, and in that moment, our fingers brushed. It was such a small touch, so fleeting, yet my heart pounded so hard, I nearly pressed my hand to my chest to steady myself. Daniel didn't pull away right away. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and neither of us looked away. The office held its breath. Just the two of us. 2 racing heartbeats. A thin wall of restraint beginning to melt. Daniel stepped back first. He cleared his throat, smiled gently. "I should probably let you get back to it." But from that moment on, everything had changed. I started looking forward to mornings in the break room, making coffee side by side. I watched for his face during meetings, longing for that brief, searching glance across the room. I noticed every detail. The way he adjusted his sleeves, How he tilted his head when listening. That soft, crooked smile that appeared when he sensed I was tense. And I knew he noticed the changes in me, too. There was a day I made a small mistake in a report. Flustered, I expected criticism. But Daniel simply looked at me and said, gently, "Don't be too hard on yourself. We all get tired sometimes." Just one sentence, yet it nearly broke me. Because how long had it been since I'd heard kindness like that from my own husband? That night, lying in bed next to Mark, who had already turned his back to me, lost in heavy sleep, I found myself dreaming of Daniel. I imagined the feel of his hands, the brush of his lips against my skin. Sweet, forbidden fantasies I knew I shouldn't be having. But I wasn't strong enough to stop them. I was slipping, slowly, steadily. And I knew it wouldn't stay just a dream for much longer. It was a Friday evening. A light rain fell outside. Most of the office had left early, but I stayed behind, saying I needed to finish the quarterly report. Daniel stayed, too. I remember when he walked into my office. The shoulders of his shirt were damp, touched by the mist as he'd gone out to his car. The warm yellow light cast a long shadow behind him on the floor. The small room suddenly seemed to shrink, filled only with breath and a heavy silence between us. "Claire." He said my name, softly, almost like a prayer. Just one word, but it carried everything we had both been holding back for months. I stood up, my heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. When Daniel stepped closer, I didn't step away. Neither of us said a word because there was nothing left to say. He touched my cheek, his fingers hesitating for a second, as if giving me a final chance to pull away. But I didn't move. And when his lips finally met mine, every defense inside me collapsed. That first kiss was both tender and intense. He didn't rush. He kissed me slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing every sensation of this first touch. I slid my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. His body pressed against mine, warm, solid, frighteningly familiar. I heard a soft gasp escape from my lips as he leaned his forehead against mine and whispered, "Are you sure?" I nodded, barely holding back tears. He lifted me effortlessly, like I weighed nothing, and sat me gently on top of his desk. His fingers moved to my shirt, undoing the buttons one by one, slow and patient. Each one that came undone sent little shocks skimming across my skin. When Daniel lowered his mouth to the hollow of my collarbone, I closed my eyes and let myself feel everything, every raw, dizzying pulse of being alive. The feeling of skin against skin, sweet and aching, because I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. His hands, gentle yet full of yearning, followed the curves of my body, each movement filled with reverence, like I was something fragile, something sacred. There was no urgency. Every kiss, every caress was an unspoken declaration. I've wanted you for so long. And when Daniel finally entered me, the connection was so deep, so overwhelming. I wept not from regret, but from the aching beauty of being seen, being desired, being loved, maybe for the first time in years. We made love on that small office desk, surrounded by the golden glow of the lamp and the soft, endless sound of rain outside. There were no promises, no vows. Just two people, forgetting the world, finding each other like two lost souls stumbling into light. Afterward, Daniel held me close, letting me rest my head against his chest. We didn't speak. We just listened to each other's heartbeats, knowing that from that night on, everything had changed. After that night, neither of us spoke of what had happened. There were no sweeping declarations, no grand promises. But between us, something had been tied quietly, tightly. We sought each other out with our eyes. With fleeting touches disguised as accidents in the hallway, with standing just a little too close while reviewing a document on a screen. It was all understood, like a play written for only two actors in a world too blind to notice. The following Wednesday, Daniel asked to meet after work under the pretense of going over the project. We drove to the outskirts of town, to a roadside motel, where strangers avoided eye contact at the front desk. The room was simple, a large bed with white sheets, thick curtains, and a dusty fake flower arrangement on the table. Not romantic. Not luxurious. But when Daniel locked the door behind us and pulled me into his arms, the rest of the world disappeared. We loved each other more fiercely, as if afraid every second might be taken from us. Daniel whispered my name against my damp skin. I traced my nails along his back, clung to the solid frame of him like it was the only truth I had left. At one point, he cupped my face in his hands and said in a broken voice, "I wish things were simpler." I only smiled, placing a finger over his lips to silence what we both already knew. Because outside that door, there were other lives waiting, other people, other duties, old promises neither of us had the courage to break after just one night. The meetings that followed were still the same, furtive, rushed, but full of longing. Once, we barely had time to be together in the back seat of his car, parked in an empty mall parking lot. Daniel kissed me hungrily, like we were trying to hold on to something already slipping away. Another time, we hid away in another cheap, lonely hotel room. We made love quickly, desperately, as if time had turned against us. And each time, I felt like I came alive a little more and died a little too. At night, I would lie beside Mark, the man who had once meant the world to me, and feel nothing but the cold distance between our backs, turned away from each other. I cried silently. And every time, I told myself, just this once. And every time, I failed, dragged back into Daniel's arms by a loneliness too deep to fight. I wasn't myself anymore. Or maybe, for the first time in years, I finally was. By day, I lived like nothing had happened. I went to work, smiled politely, answered emails, scheduled meetings. At home, I made dinner, asked Mark about his day at work, and sat beside him watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to. But every night, when the lights went out, when only the darkness remained and the slow whir of the ceiling fan above, the guilt would come rushing in like the tide. I lay next to Mark, the man who had never stopped being kind to me, and asked myself, what the hell have I done? One night, in a moment of weakness, I turned toward him in the middle of the night, pressed my cheek to his back, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Mark shifted, half asleep, and gently pulled me closer without asking why. And it was that blind trust that broke me 100 times more. I began to change. I snapped at small things. I avoided Mark's gaze. I felt dishonest even in the most harmless of exchanges. One lie led to another, and eventually I no longer recognized who I was. I wasn't myself with Daniel either. I loved him with a mix of longing and guilt, like I was both punishing and trying to save myself with the same act. Daniel was different. He didn't say much, but there was always something heavy in his eyes every time we parted after another stolen night. I knew he was hurting too, but neither of us was strong enough to stop. One time, while buttoning up his shirt in yet another cheap hotel room, Daniel turned to me and asked, "Are you happy?" I didn't answer. Because how could I? I didn't even know what happiness meant anymore. I asked myself, if Mark ever found out, if my marriage fell apart, would Daniel step into the light with me? Would he love me in real life with bills, dull dinners, petty fights, or was our love only beautiful because it was forbidden? That question hung heavy in my chest, unanswered and unbearable. Some nights, I sat alone in the bathroom, cold water running down my shoulders, staring into the mirror. A 37-year-old woman, with a husband, a stable job, and everything that should have looked perfect from the outside. And felt a terrifying emptiness inside. Where had I lost myself? Or had I never really found me at all? I don't remember exactly how it happened. Maybe one rushed morning, I left my phone on the kitchen counter while making coffee. Maybe it was a text from Daniel, just a few simple words. "I miss you." Friday? Mark walked into the kitchen just as I was pouring milk into a glass. I heard the familiar ding from my phone, the one I always pretended not to notice when I was around him. He picked it up, probably thinking it was a message from our group of friends. It only took a second. But I knew everything had changed. I saw his shoulders stiffen. His grip tightened on the phone. When he turned around, the eyes I had once loved and trusted were now hollow and hurt. "Claire," he said, voice low and shaky. "What is this?" I stood frozen, holding the coffee cup, not even feeling the burn of the heat against my hand. Every excuse, every denial evaporated in an instant. The truth was too raw to hide. "I'm asking again." Mark stepped closer, voice darker now. "What the hell are you doing?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. There was no turning back. No way to lie anymore. He tossed the phone onto the table, not violently, not the kind of man who breaks things, but with a kind of despair that felt even heavier than rage. He stepped back, bracing himself against the counter, head lowered. I could hear his breathing, fast and uneven, like a wounded animal. "Is it Daniel?" Mark's voice cracked on the last word. I nodded. Just a small nod, but it was enough to shatter everything between us. There was no shouting, no smashing of dishes, just a silence so thick it felt like the house had been drained of all air. Mark walked to the door, grabbed his car keys. Before slamming it shut behind him, he turned around, eyes bloodshot. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Claire." And then he was gone. I stood there alone in the kitchen, flooded with morning sunlight, but feeling colder than I'd ever felt in any winter night. I wanted to run after him, scream, beg for forgiveness. But my feet wouldn't move, because deep down I knew I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the best version of myself. Mark didn't come back right away. All day, I didn't get a single call, a single message, not even one word. I didn't dare call him, didn't dare text an apology. Every second dragged like a year. I could feel fear rising with every breath I took. That evening, as I sat silently in the living room, lights on, but the house swallowed in darkness, Mark finally came home. He walked in with a blank expression, only his eyes, the eyes that once gave me comfort, now reflected nothing but emptiness. He didn't look at me right away. Instead, he went straight to the couch, sat down, and let out a heavy sigh. I stood up, rushed toward him, but stopped in my tracks the moment I saw his face. Helpless, I sat in the chair across from him. The space between us now felt like an unbridgeable canyon. "Claire," Mark began, his voice hoarse, "you can't even explain this, can you?" I wanted to say something, to explain, but even the word sorry caught in my throat. The truth was too clear. My betrayal was too great. What have you done?" Mark continued, not as a question, but like he was asking himself. "You're not the woman I knew. Why? Why would you do this? When we had everything?" I looked down, unable to meet his eyes. He was right, I wasn't the same woman he had fallen in love with. Why him? "Why Daniel?" he asked again, as if still unable to believe it. "What did you find in him that you didn't find in me? Why didn't you talk to me before doing this?" Each word hit like a knife to the heart, but I couldn't blame him. I couldn't defend myself, not against the truth. "I don't know," I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I don't even know why anymore. Everything just got out of control." Mark stood and walked toward me, but didn't touch me. "So you chose him, didn't you? You chose Daniel over me." I couldn't say a word. The pain in my chest was too much. I could only cry in silence. So what had I done? What had I done to us? To our marriage? Mark stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, eyes red. "You know, Claire, I used to believe we could get through anything. But now I don't know if I can keep going with someone I don't recognize anymore." He turned away, walked toward the door, saying nothing else. But as his hand touched the doorknob, he paused for a second. "We need time. I need time." And then he walked out, closing the door behind him. The house felt empty, silent, only me, left to face the choices that had changed everything. After that night, the silence lingered, heavy and suffocating. Mark didn't come home right away, and I didn't call him, even though 1,000 unspoken words burned inside me. In the days that followed, We lived like strangers under the same roof. No words were exchanged, just a silence that grew heavier with each passing day. I tried to keep things normal, but I couldn't. At every meal, in every passing glance, all I could see was the disappointment in Mark's eyes that no longer held the warmth I once knew. He felt like a stranger. And so did I. On the third day, Mark came home late, again, like always. But this time, something was different. He said nothing when he walked through the door, didn't greet me like he used to. We just stood there, looking at each other, still separated by a distance that felt impossible to close. He walked into the living room. I followed, trying to start a conversation. "Mark," I began, my voice barely audible. "Can you talk to me?" He turned to face me, his eyes no longer burning with anger, just utterly exhausted. "So now you want to talk?" he asked, dryly, like he had no strength left to even face me. "I know I was wrong," I said. "But I can't go on living in this silence. I can't let it end like this." Mark looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You know," he said, his voice laced with fatigue and unresolved anger, "I used to think I'd never have to question your loyalty. But now, I don't know what to do anymore." I looked down again, unable to face him. "I know I hurt you, but if I could change, maybe we'd still have a chance. A chance to fix what we had." Mark stayed silent, then slowly sat down on the couch, his face stiff. "Claire, I don't know. I love you. I loved you so much. But this is too much for me. I can't live like this, with all this doubt. I just can't." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt so heavy, like even breathing might shatter everything left. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but I knew some wounds can't be healed with just a hug. Mark looked at me again, his eyes empty. "We need time," he said, his voice softer now, but still steeped in disappointment. "Time to think. To look at everything again. And I can't promise anything. Do you still love me?" I asked, choking back sobs. Mark looked at me, his eyes no longer filled with love, just the weariness of someone who had been hurt too deeply. "Does it matter, Claire? Does love fix everything? Or is it just something we say to avoid facing the truth?" I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. Love can't replace trust once it's gone. And I didn't know if I could live with this guilt for the rest of my life. Mark stood up and walked out again. But this time, it wasn't the kind of leaving where he'd come back in a few hours. He left without looking back. And I remained there, alone in the empty house, thinking about a relationship that could never return to what it once was. The first month after Mark's decision felt endless, like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. No more shared dinners, no more quiet conversations before bed. We only exchanged short phrases, rarely speaking for more than a minute. Mark still lived in the house, but it no longer felt like the home I once called our haven. Each morning, I woke up later, no longer in a rush to make breakfast for him. Mark didn't need me anymore. Not my questions, not my warm touch, not those rushed kisses before heading out. I knew I had already lost him, even if he was still physically there. One time, I saw him standing by the window, eyes staring out like he was lost in something far away. Looking at him, I couldn't help but wonder if he still loved me, or if he was only holding on to this life out of obligation. I wasn't sure anymore. Mark never brought up our relationship again after that night. He only said he needed time. But time didn't erase my guilt, didn't help me explain what had happened, and certainly couldn't repair the damage I'd done to him. I tried to focus on work, tried to find small joys in daily life. But honestly, it was all just pretending. Every time I saw Daniel, the man I had betrayed my husband with, I felt an overwhelming wave of shame. I thought about the early days when Mark and I were still innocent, dreaming about the future and believing love would be enough to carry us through anything. Now all that remained was a deep, unhealable wound in my heart. On the first weekend after our confrontation, Mark and I took a walk in the park near our house, the first in a long time that wasn't out of obligation, but simply to be together in silence. We didn't say much. We just looked at each other occasionally, eyes filled with sadness, but nothing more than quiet. Mark spoke very little, but what he said stayed with me. "Claire, I don't know if I can forgive you," he said. "But I need time to find myself again." I looked at him and realized nothing could change overnight. Everything had passed through a door we couldn't go back through. He was right, we needed time, and I had to accept that some wounds couldn't be healed with a simple apology. Time might give us an answer, but I didn't know if it would be enough to keep him, not when we had already lost so much. One morning, Mark didn't come home after work. I assumed he was with a friend, or maybe someone new. I couldn't help but worry. Had he decided to let go? Or did I still have a chance to make things right? I looked out the window as the sky turned to sunset, and I felt something I had never fully grasped before. Sometimes, love isn't everything. Some things are simply too broken for love alone to fix. And if I couldn't find a way to repair what I'd done, maybe this ending would be the right thing for both of us. Day by day, the distance between Mark and me grew, not just physically, but emotionally. We were no longer partners. We were two separate people, each trying to find peace in a chaotic world of our own making. To outsiders, everything still looked normal. They didn't see our empty conversations, or how we barely looked at each other during family gatherings or dinners with friends. I started to distance myself from those closest to me, hesitant to talk about my marriage. The silence between me and them, though unspoken, felt sharp, like a knife. They could sense something was wrong, but no one wanted to confront the truth. That sense of isolation grew stronger every day. Friends who once meant so much to me had become unreachable shadows. When I tried to open up about the struggles between Mark and me, they just listened quietly, unsure whether to comfort or advise. Even I no longer knew what to say, and eventually I stopped trying. My parents had noticed something was off, but they kept trying to encourage me. My mom said, "Sweetheart, everything will be okay. Just be patient." But I knew no matter what she said, her words couldn't mend the cracks between me and Mark. Still, what hurt most was how Mark had changed toward our family. We used to be so close. Now every gathering felt strained. Mark no longer wanted to attend family events. Whenever I invited him to dinners with friends or holiday get-togethers, he always declined. It felt like he was trying to cut himself off, not just from me, but from everyone. I knew he didn't want them to see the exhaustion and disappointment in his eyes. So he chose silence and distance. One evening, during a family dinner, my mom asked about Mark and me. I felt a lump rise in my throat. All I could say was, "He needs time to think." It was a lie, one meant to protect both my family and myself, but it stung like a blade in my chest. A deep loneliness settled in me as I caught my mother's worried gaze. She didn't know that I, too, was afraid not just for Mark, but for myself. Conversations with friends were no longer the same. Talks about work or daily life felt meaningless. They could see I was trying to stay composed, but everyone could sense that something was falling apart. The truth was, I couldn't go back to the way I used to be. I couldn't be myself when everything around me had shifted. Eventually, I realized the change didn't just happen between Mark and me. It had seeped into everything. My relationships with family and friends had all been affected. The sense of loss wasn't just about my husband. It extended to bonds that used to feel unshakable, now fragile like thin threads, ready to snap with just one strong gust of wind. As the days drifted by in a haze, I started to see that nothing could return to how it once was. I used to believe love could fix everything, but now I understand. Sometimes, love isn't strong enough to heal deep wounds. My mistakes left cracks too wide to seal with apologies. Each morning I woke up feeling empty. We were no longer a couple who greeted each other with soft kisses. We weren't close friends whispering into the night. I listened to the ticking of the clock, feeling each second pass like time itself was forcing me to confront who I had become. I thought about Daniel. That relationship had begun as curiosity, a temptation I couldn't resist. But in the aftermath, I saw it for what it was: not love, but an escape from the loneliness I felt in my marriage. I had destroyed something precious, and all I had left was a hollow sense of regret. It's hard to describe what it feels like to look in the mirror and not recognize yourself. I saw a stranger, not the woman I once loved or respected. She was someone who had lost herself in a moment of weakness, of recklessness. And yet, in that darkness, I began to see something essential. I could change. I needed time to heal, and I couldn't keep avoiding the truth. The guilt clung to me like a shadow, but I knew if I ever wanted to move forward, I had to face it. Running away wasn't a solution. I couldn't keep burying the pain and anxiety. I had to learn how to forgive myself before I could hope for forgiveness from anyone else. With Mark, I knew we couldn't go back. Our relationship had changed, not from a lack of love, but from a lack of respect and communication. We had left too much unsaid, and I had looked for comfort in all the wrong places. Now I understand. What we really needed was time to reflect on what truly mattered. Not fleeting moments of passion, but real connection, honesty, and forgiveness. But maybe we had already run out of time to rebuild that. I started reclaiming myself. No longer just a neglected wife. No longer a woman entangled in a secret relationship. I was me, and I had to learn to love myself before I could love anyone else. Little by little, I began to make time for myself again. Time to find joy in the small things, a quiet morning, a good book, or an aimless walk through the park with no worries about the future. That awakening didn't come easily. But I knew that to move forward, I had to face my mistakes, accept the consequences, and change. I couldn't go back, but I could create a new path for myself. Deep down, I began to believe that maybe, one day, I would find true love again, not with someone else, but with myself. And if the opportunity came, if Mark was willing, maybe we could find a way to coexist peacefully again. But for now, I had to heal. That was the only way forward. One morning, I woke up and realized I had changed. I was no longer the exhausted woman buried in guilt and bad decisions. I began to see life through a different lens. There was no more constant anxiety, no more shame when I looked in the mirror. I had passed through something profound, and I understood I had emerged on the other side. Mark and I still stayed in touch. We couldn't go back, but we couldn't completely sever ties either. Sometimes we talked about small, ordinary things. Those conversations no longer felt tense, just calm, like old friends. We knew, no matter what, that we had once walked a long road together. And even if we were no longer husband and wife, the beautiful memories remained. I no longer hoped for reconciliation. But I didn't regret the decision to separate. Some people say that ending a marriage is failure, but I see it differently. Sometimes, letting go is the only way two people can rediscover themselves. And I believe that's what both Mark and I needed. Still, I felt a quiet sorrow. Sorrow for what could have been, for the chances we missed, for the little things I overlooked. But I couldn't change the past. All I could do was learn from it and move forward. I lost the love of one person. But I found a love I had never known, love for myself. As for Daniel, I knew we had no future. He was part of my confusion, a fleeting moment disconnected from reality, just an escape. We had found each other during a time of weakness, but we both understood that what we had wasn't built to last. We parted in silence, without bitterness or blame. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes, what we search for in others is really something we need to create within ourselves. I started rebuilding my life from the simplest things. I learned to enjoy moments spent alone, a quiet morning, an afternoon walk in the park, or getting lost in the pages of a good book. Those small moments, once overlooked, became sources of great joy. They helped me realize that I don't need someone else to feel whole. I am a strong woman, and I can live a full, meaningful life without depending on anyone. I can't say I've forgotten my mistakes, but I'm proud that I've learned how to forgive myself. Sometimes, regret isn't the worst feeling, it's life's greatest teacher. And I will carry those lessons with me for the rest of my life, so I never forget who I am and what I truly need in this world.